For the last 5 or 6 years, on many afternoons around 4 or 5 p.m., I've been overcome by the feeling that my life is effectively over. This is not a sense that the world is ending, which has been in vogue for quite some time now, and maybe for good reason. It's a personal foreboding, a distinct feeling of being at the end of my days. My time, while technically not up, is disappearing in the rear-view mirror. The fact that this feeling of ambient doom tends to coincide with the blue-tinged, pre-gloaming light of the late afternoon lends the whole thing a cosmic beauty, as devastating as it is awe-inspiring. As such, I've dubbed this the Catastrophe Hour. Getting older is the oldest story in the world, of course. Still, the time, my time, is disappearing at a pace that is faster than I had ever anticipated, and I dare say faster than the pace experienced by any previous generation. As far as cultural relevance goes, Gen X is shaping up to have a tragically short lifespan. Just as we were finding our footing in the early to mid-2000s, getting real jobs and looking almost like respectable grown-ups, the twin forces of hyper-speed tech advancement and head-spinning social changes came along and fermented us before we'd even ripened on the vine. By the time we were 50, many of us were as good as 80, or so it often feels to me. The consolations of aging have always been in the eye of the beholder. Virginia Woolf at 50 wrote in her diaries of feeling poised to shoot forth quite free, straight and undeflected, my bolts, whatever they are. She did not believe in aging, she said, but rather forever altering one's aspect to the sun. I am now 3 years past the age Woolf was when she talked about altering her aspect to the sun. And while I don't know enough about astrology to connect the dots of my memories to trail markers of the Earth's orbit, I've lately become aware of a sort of baseline visceral sensation hovering over my emotional life. Again and again, this sensation conjures the same sentiment. I'm glad I lived when I did. Specifically, I'm glad I was young when I was. Life to me these days often feels like I'm backing up slowly from a tense and increasingly untenable situation. If the world, in the post-Trump, post-George Floyd, post-COVID, post-whatever happened 5 minutes ago age, feels in many ways like a bank robbery in progress, I'm the lady who was finishing up with the teller at precisely the moment the robbers entered the building. While the rest of the customers dropped to the ground, I managed to slither away just in time, my transaction completed, the door hitting me firmly but not violently on the way out. So it's a really wonderful introduction that I think captures pretty much almost all of the main themes of the book. And so you said just now, when we were talking before the beginning of this recording, that when you're writing an essay collection, you don't know what the theme is until afterwards, because this is mostly essays that you had already written and published elsewhere, which you've collected into this book. And so what you had to do, I presume, is go through selecting and then realize what the main themes were and put together an explanation. So how aware were you of this theme of personal aging and running out of time, and how aware of that were you as you're writing the essays themselves originally, and how did you feel about it when you did realize and discover?
I was sort of vaguely aware of it while I was writing the pieces. So the pieces were written over about a 10-year period from 2016 roughly to 2024. And I was 46 in 2016. So you can do the math there. So I was definitely thinking about these issues. And when I started to put the book together, I was horrified reading over this decades worth of work, how preoccupied I was with aging, and how when I was 46, I thought I was so old. And then I was sitting there at, 50 53, 54 reading this and thinking, my gosh, what a silly little 46-year-old to be whining about this. So I was a little bit worried that the book would be sort of too mired in these concerns. But, it turns out that this was really my best work. I mean, the book came about because the publisher approached me and they said, "Do you have anything for us?" And, I wasn't in a position to sort of write a new brand new book for them start to finish, but I said, well, I do have these pieces that I wrote over the last decade that were heavily paywalled and most people didn't read them, so would you want to put them together? And they said sure. So it was really sort of culling through what I had written, and it turned out that the best pieces on a literary level happened to be concerned with aging.
Yeah. You talk about, for example, by the way, you and I are exactly the same age. So, and I have many of the same feelings, which maybe we'll return to. But one way in which I have really noticed it is that I am online dating, which is a horrible experience. More about that perhaps another time. And I realized that I can no longer say that I'm happy to date a man who's much older than I am, because time at the end above my age is kind of squished, is running
Right,
out.
right.
So if I were 40, I might happily date a 55-year-old, but now at 56, I'm not going to date a 71-year-old because he might quickly die on me.
Yeah.
And that has given me a strong sense of being kind of squeezed.
Yeah, the exchange rate doesn't quite work out, right? Because,
Yeah.
if men in their 50s are increasingly dating, even women in their 20s, because the men in their 20s are not really available. So a lot of
Mm,
these young girls they don't mind dating much, much older. And so, what that means is that we would be stuck. We would be needing to date 80 or 90-year-olds in order to
yeah.
have the proportion work out there. So, to each his
Yeah.
own, I suppose.
I briefly joined this dating site for the over 50s. And I think over 50s was a bit of an understatement. There were so many guys in their 70s. And I have never received so many messages. I opened my inbox after a week and there were about 50 messages there from guys
Oh,
who were
well, it
keen
must
to
have been
meet
an
me.
ego boost.
Well, I don't know. All these guys were absolutely geriatric. So um, it was kind of worrying that they even thought of me as within their age range. And I
Yeah.
quickly left that group again. But yeah, this is an ongoing theme, which is how, having just got in at the tail end of something good, particularly as a writer, being kind of you have this elegiac sense that comes up again and again in the essays, that there is a shift now away from writing and towards kind of content creation, which is very different both in form and also in content, in the kinds of revelations that it leads to.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, like you, I have been podcasting for a while. I started my podcast, The Unspeakable, in 2020, so this is the 5th year. I always had wanted to do a podcast. I loved radio. I love audio content. I always wanted my own talk show when I was a kid. So in some ways, it was a very natural kind of progression. I'm going to say it wasn't something I was adding. It was not like I stopped writing, obviously. But yeah, I just, I've been writing essays. I mean, I write everything, but personal essays have been kind of my signature form, and I've been writing them for 30 years or more. And there's just something about the way they land now with readers and even critics, reviewers, that's very different. And there's this it's good and bad. I mean, in the past, there was a sense that something was sanctioned. It's like there could be a piece and it might be a little bit unusual or very personal or revealing or complicated or asking the reader to kind of, you know, challenge their assumptions a bit, or whatever. And it would be presented in a publication that you were familiar with, ideally, and it would have been edited and copy edited, and it was handed to the audience in such a way that signaled, take this seriously. We, the gatekeepers of this institution, this publication, take this seriously and deem this worthy of our publication, and so should you. And I think that just made for a very different kind of transaction, and a sort of ability to take risks, because your reader is not just left to their own devices. Like, what is this? Is this a blog? Did this person just like spit this out this morning and hand this over to me? And, certainly, we entered this realm of extremely confessional material that started it's always been the case, but it really ramped up, and I'd say the early 2000s, into that kind of online media sphere. And so I guess I stopped trusting my audience to take what I was saying in the way that I intended it. And it makes me really sad to say that. But at the same time, I have to say that the response to this book has been very positive. And so I've been heartened that people do seem to be understanding what I'm trying to do. It may be because the people reading it are mostly my audience and they know what I'm up to anyway. But yeah, I don't know how you feel about this, if there's just a sort of difference in the way your work is being received.
Well, I guess I haven't spent most of my life being a writer. I have written a couple of books, but they are more scholarly books. And I only really started writing in around 2010. I started writing personal essays. And at first I just published them on Facebook. Like, I used to write these really long Facebook statuses, essay length Facebook statuses. And I had many followers on there. Friends and also public followers. Yeah, I do feel, though, that I have this sense of being on the cusp of a major transition. And I'm thinking of this mostly in terms of AI. Although there's also the shift, as you say, from written content to oral content and video content, which is like more immediate and unedited and often very fragmentary.
Yeah. And not correct a lot of the time. Not fact-checked, not reliable.
Not fact-checked or anything like that. But I'm just talking about the purely personal stuff, the kind of personal essay style stuff, or what would have been personal essays in the past. And now with AI, I think the next stage is going to be people will not be writing at all. They will just be training their AI to create a voice for them. And it's going to be increasingly difficult to see what is AI and what is not. And I'm already getting submissions to Quillette, which were clearly written by LLMs, or I think they were.
Are they any good?
And no.
Okay, that's
so
good.
far not, but that will be changing soon. And I do feel as though, like you, I feel very lucky to have lived when I did. And I also feel that ultimately the upshot of this will be positive, as it is with all major technological changes. But for the people who live during the middle of the change, it's going to be very hard. So that's my concern.
So that's where we are now, the middle of the change, you think? Or is this the beginning?
No, I think we're at the beginning. We're at the beginning.
Okay, so this is not, it's going to get worse, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's going to get worse before it gets better. That is always the way. People laugh at the Luddites, but they were, and of course it's better that we ended up with factory machines and people are not spending 18 hours a day. 10-year-olds are not spending 18 hours a day working in the factory and pulling coal carts or something. But if you were one of the people who made a living as an artisan and you lived during that moment of the first introduction of the machines, that was the worst possible time for you to be living.
Right. Okay, well, Lucky us.
Sorry. One of the things is, so you talk about, one of the things that's central is the theme of real estate, which is, you tackled in another book of yours that I've also read, another collection called If I Lived in That House, I Would Be Home by Now or something. I can't remember what the
I
title
love
is.
that. Life would be perfect if I lived in that house. Yeah.
Yeah.
Life would be perfect if I lived in that. Yeah, it's a memoir. It's actually not an essay collection, but yes,
Yeah, it's a
that
memoir,
came out in
sorry.
2010. So I've been at this obsession for a long time.
Yeah, my memories of that book are rather hazy, as with any book that I read that a decade ago. But you return to this topic, and it's kind of it's emblematic of a kind of personal journey, a search for identity. It's a search for your personal environment. And you describe a long period that you spent living in New York, but feeling as though, you say that at first you were living as though you had one foot in and one foot out of the door, like a cat. I don't think you say this, but you couldn't decide whether to either come all the way in or go all the way out and close the door behind you. You were torn between Los Angeles and New York, and you said that that's how it began. And by the end, you felt as though you were lying across the threshold in a fetal position while flakes of sheetrock were falling down on your head. And
Yeah.
I think I now live in Australia, where people are completely obsessed with this topic. And, I know I will personally almost certainly never own any property, and will still be renting until the day I die. That's the best case scenario. And that is that has become kind of a large part of the zeitgeist, people's perception that it's no longer within their reach to become homeowners at any point. I wanted to ask whether the recent fires and your experience with that, how that has affected everything. And
Yeah. Well, we should say that the Catastrophe Hour, the title of the book, the title essay is about trying to build a house in Los Angeles. So I am such a crazy person when it comes to homes and architecture and design and shelter, that I got the idea in 2017 that because I could not afford to buy a house in Los Angeles, I just couldn't afford to buy the kind of house I wanted, which was modest, mind you, that it was going to make more sense to build one. And actually, at the time, that wasn't completely insane. It was semi-insane. And I ended up spending like 7 years trying to develop this property, and architectural plans and permits, and fighting with the neighbors and all the. And anyway, it ended up being what I then thought of as a catastrophe, because I ended up having to just give up, and I lost quite a bit of money, and sort of lost face. And it was just sort of personally devastating, because I loved having this obsession with building this house. So anyway, but to answer your question, fast forward to obviously January of this year, an actual catastrophe happened, not a metaphorical one, which is that there were these just like extraordinary wildfires. I mean, like, well, I mean, people in Australia, you guys know about this kind of thing. And this was just historic. And the house I was renting, I did not own it, burned to the ground, as did the whole town. Tens of thousands of people were displaced. And yeah, it kind of it was shocking, but also just felt kind of in keeping with my preoccupations. It's sort of like, wow, okay, there you go. You get your next chapter, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Did it make you think differently about the preoccupations, or
No,
um
no,
you had
no.
yeah.
No, I mean, I lost all my stuff. Um, and I mean, I have owned homes before. The reason I had the hubris to think I could build this house was that I had owned a house when I was married, and life would be perfect if I lived in that house. Was about buying a house when I was 34 in Los Angeles, a very small house. So I have been in the market, and it was just I was kind of beating myself up about trying to outsmart the market by building a house. So yeah, I mean, it's I'm in a better position than a lot of people, and in a worse position than a lot of people. But yeah, I really I love houses, and I love thinking about houses, and for me, I'm just lucky that I didn't own the house that burned down. I mean, that would have just been terrible. I just lost my stuff, and I lost artwork, which is actually the most devastating thing. Books, yes, but it's really the artwork. So
Oh,
yeah, it's
God.
I mean, it's certainly gonna put a squeeze on the market here. You have a lot of people whose houses burned down, and the ones that can afford to just run out and buy another house started doing that almost immediately.
Mm.
But there's gonna be a lot of rebuilding. I mean, people have no choice but to try to rebuild because they have mortgages. They're still paying mortgages on houses that don't exist anymore, right? Because you still got to pay the bank. So the only thing to do is take what little insurance, what insurance money you do have, and try to rebuild with that. But I can tell you, as somebody who spent 7 years trying to build a house, it is not going to be as easy as a lot of people think.
So to me, there are three really standout essays in the book, or at least my favorites. And I think all three of them encapsulate certain things about the book. So I'd like to kind of look at each of them in turn. I mean, there are a lot of amazing concepts, like you talk about the idea of a broken in world. That's not one of my three favorites, but I enjoyed all of the essays, not to imply that any of them
That's okay. You can't
are not meaningful.
you can't have a favorite without having a least favorite. So
That's not my least favorite, but the broken in world is this kind of concept of things being kind of, how do you put it? You talk about being in a magical place. So you're talking specifically about how conversations with people changed after you got divorced, and you began to realize that many people's lives many people who you had thought of as having not picture perfect, but very secure lives were revealing, their drug addictions and financial difficulties and mental health crises and
yeah,
legal fights with spouses and things too. And you said that, of course, if you could have clicked your fingers and made those people perfectly happy again, you would have done so. So it wasn't about schadenfreude, and it wasn't enjoying other people's pain, but there was a kind of beauty and meaningfulness that came out of that. And you say that you slipped into a new kind of world. It's a world in which the stiff hide of convention and expectation is softened into supple leather. It's a world that can no longer support pretense. It's a world built on scar tissue, which turns out to be a surprisingly solid foundation. I'm missing some bits out from this reading. Like a Narnia for disaffected adults, the broken-in world comes with its share of strange, terrifying creatures, but ultimately procures a kind of divine comfort. And this seems to be a theme throughout the book, the idea of both the broken in, the comfortable, coming to terms with imperfection. You have another essay which is called Same Life, Higher Rent,
yeah,
which is where you talk about a kind of returning to a life set point, like the kind of set point when you're trying to lose weight. And
right.
you
The
keep
situational
returning.
set point, I call it.
Yeah,
Yes.
situational set point. And that feeling of something that is broken, lived in, infused with sadness. And that is part of what gives it meaning. Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah. Yeah, the broken in world concept, that's that's the first piece in the book. This was the earliest piece. I wrote it in 2016. And yeah, I had a very amicable divorce, so that was very lucky. But so much so that I went to New York just to kind of put some space between my husband and me, because we would have probably just remained too enmeshed otherwise. And, I was reconnecting with a lot of people that I had known in New York, a couple decades earlier when I had lived there. I lived there for my entire 20s. And, these were a lot of people that I would see on Facebook and stuff like that. And you see their kids and you see their houses and you see the sort of the highlight reels of their lives, of course, and they all look like they totally have it together and their, kids are thriving and their marriages are great and everything. And I found that, when people sort of caught wind that I was back in New York and that I was divorced, they were reaching out, "Lo, let's catch up, let's have dinner, let's have lunch," or whatever. And they would start telling me these things about their lives that like I would never have guessed on Facebook. It's like they seemed to be perfect, but in fact, like people were having affairs or like the kids were really messed up and, somebody had been institutionalized, like just stuff like that. And I found it I'm sorry that they were going through this, but the interaction was so much more real and richer and more satisfying than any kind of interaction we even would have had 20 years ago when we were in our 20s, because we were just shiny young things back then. Like, I think I talk about like the stiff, shiny patent leather of our youth had worn down into this like very supple leather. It had broken in like a pair of shoes.
Mm,
And it
mm.
was so much more satisfying and peaceful to be in this broken in world rather than in the stiff, shiny world. And everybody was kind of just being honest about things that had gone wrong in their lives. And I found it quite profound, actually. And so that's one nice thing about growing older, right? People are just kind of
Mm,
drop the pretense.
mm,
Um, and
mm.
so, and I found that they were telling me because I was divorced. It was kind of like I was a safe person because I was clearly had failed at something, right? So they sort of knew going in that I might be a safe person to talk with, or I wouldn't judge them or something.
It's also that is the world of stories. I mean, if everything is going well, then there's no story.
It's
Story
boring,
begins with
right? Yeah,
a
right.
problem that needs to be solved or a conflict or, in classic literature, in fiction, fiction's often there are many more orphans running around in fiction than in real life, and
Mhm.
fiction often begin with parents dying or deserting you or being in some way completely incompetent because you've got to be able to get either into trouble or up to mischief or both.
Right,
Or
right,
there's no story. Without
right.
kind of damage, there's no story.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, or a story, I think, I mean, as a writer, I always tell my students this, like, start with the most embarrassing story, like, don't, lead with the humiliation because then you can shape it into something else. Yeah.
Well, it also feels more honest because it's even though you could be equally honestly talking about how happy you are and how wonderful everything is, but it it doesn't there isn't as much cost to it. So you you make these kind of bold admissions as a writer because that demonstrates the fact that you have skin in the game. That kind of it's a costly signal, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's well said. Yeah. So, yeah, it was interesting to write that piece. I never I never published it anywhere. I mean, a lot of the pieces in the book, they appeared in I was writing for Medium, which had its own little magazine imprint at the time, and but very, very paywalled. But the Broken In world, I mean, I remember writing that in 2016, and there was like nothing I could do with it. I mean, back in the day, I think I would have like, in the 90s when I was, starting out, I would have like tried to place it in some magazine or something. And actually, this is exactly to your first question. that kind of piece was so personal and so particular that I couldn't imagine putting it in a magazine or a publication or publishing it. Let's just say I couldn't imagine publishing it and having it taken the right way, which is such a strange thing because all I ever wanted to do is publish. Like, that's when you're a writer, you want people to read what you write, you publish. And so that one lived in my drawer for, 10 years, basically, 8 years. So funny how that is.
What's a surprising thing about personal essays, I think, and this isn't a thought original to me, many other people have said this, but the more intimate your revelations are, the more other people will be able to relate to them.
Exactly.
So it's really odd. It's like the more superficial parts of our lives, those are very different. Each person has their own different career and home and boyfriend and furniture and dog and
the
whatever.
More particular is the more particular the details, the more people will relate. I say this to students all the time because they go, "Oh, I don't want to write this because no one's going to relate to it." It's like, no, that's exactly what you start with. The weirdest thing about yourself. It's counterintuitive.
Yeah. It's like there's this kind of deep level. I think of it like I tend to think in sci-fi metaphors all the time, but I think of it like in sci-fi they have this subspace communications, which in terms of physics doesn't make sense, I believe, at all. But so they're able to communicate across light years of distance using subspace. But it's a bit like that. It's like we're light years of different distance apart. Each person is their own microcosm and world. But beneath it is this just channel of common, not experiences even, but just feelings about experiences.
Right.
And if you can hit that channel, then everybody is kind of plugged into there. Then your subspace communication is resounding out around the galaxy.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. I'm not a science fiction person, so I'll take your word for it.
So one of my 3 favorite essays was What I Have in Common with Trans Activists. This was an absolute cracker. And it's not, despite what the title might suggest, it's not about trans issues, really. Or not directly. It's not political. This book is really not political at all, I would say.
Right.
And that I find very refreshing about it. Not that I don't enjoy your political commentary. I really do.
I don't enjoy it. No, that's
but I kind of, like many people, I'm kind of a fan of yours in general, like your take on, I want to hear your take on things. But this book is not political. And I feel that this piece expressed something that I've always, a kind of personal essay writing that I've always hated and that you always avoid, which is, it's a mentality, sorry, I'm not expressing myself very well, but it's mentality tied up with this victimhood idea, which is lots of personal essays, especially ones in the New York Times, I feel, are about what the world owes the other person, about how, about a demand, about the demand that the world normalize their feelings and experiences, plant some kind of stamp of legitimacy on them. And it's all about how other people perceive the writer, and it's blaming those other people for not having the right thoughts and feelings about the kinds of experiences the writer is describing. I don't know if that, I mean, you put it much better. So,
well, it's this idea of being an outlier versus an outsider. I mean, I think people can think that, think that if you are not the norm, if the way you want to live your life is not the normal way, that somehow makes you an outsider. It makes you an outlier, but that's not necessarily the same thing. So so in that piece, the analogy I was drawing was, my feelings around not having children. So I never really was interested in having children. When I was married, it was a struggle because, we were sort of ambivalent. And anyway, we don't need to go into the details, but suffice it to say that this issue was causing me an enormous amount of pain when I was in my marriage. And I spent all this time trying to convince myself that well, first of all, I was trying to convince myself to want to have children. Like, I was trying to talk myself into it. Okay, so that there's nothing feels worse than that. And then when I finally had to accept, I just simply don't want this, I got into this thing where I wanted to find other people who also didn't want this, and I wanted there to be a lot of us. Like, I wanted there to be just movement of people not wanting to have kids, which, by the way, this was 10 years ago or more, actually, when I was struggling with this. So it wasn't as much in the conversation as it is now. But like, I would go on Reddits and I would just go into these rabbit holes, like trying to find people talking about how they did have kids, but they regretted it. Or I wanted to like find some data showing that most people actually don't want kids, and that most people who have them do it, like data that does not exist, because the fact is that most people do want kids and most people have them. And I was doing this, and as soon as I got divorced, it just went away. Like, as soon as this particular issue stopped causing me pain, I just forgot about it. I was like, oh, yeah, fine. I don't want kids. That's it. I don't have any. That's it. I don't need to discuss it. I don't need to justify it. Like, I don't need to make a political issue about it. This has nothing to do with my identity. And it was interesting because I had actually even edited an anthology about writers choosing not to have kids. It was called, I did not give it the name. It's called Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed, 16 Writers on the Decision Not to Have Kids. And so I became sort of part of this conversation, like the child-free movement. And I hate the term child-free. I always have. And I found that I did not want to be part of this, like, as a political movement. Like, I did not want this to be part of my identity. It's just something about me. It's not the thing to lead with. And when the trans movement really started to grow more visible, I saw a lot of people struggling with this issue the way I had struggled with not wanting to have kids. It was like, it wasn't enough just to say I identify as trans. It was everybody identifies as trans, or there's a whole lot of us out there and we need to be recognized, and this affects everything about me. And the fact is that a lot of people are deep down trans, but they're not admitting it. Like, the parallels were really uncanny, actually. And I realized that a lot of people were doing this because they were in a great deal of pain. They were in a great deal of emotional pain about this identity that they had embraced, with whatever degree of authenticity was behind it. And so, yeah, that's what the piece was about. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of piece that I published on my Substack. Like, that is not a piece that would have been published in the New York Times, I suspect. But
yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. I'm just going to read a tiny bit. I get how so you say you understand the visceral level where the trans activists are coming from, and then you say, I get how personal pain can lead to a life of obsessive confirmation bias. When it comes to being in a frame of mind in which nothing but the obsessed upon subject is allowed entry into the brain, when it comes to spending nearly every waking moment searching the internet for stories that echo your own story and shielding your eyes from those that don't, when it comes to making a full-time job of showing everyone around you how great your life is, because unlike them, you know how to live authentically and not like some conventional normie basic. Guess what? I get it. That's because there was once a time in my life when I was so filled with angst about an aspect of my identity that I literally couldn't think about anything else. And I think you say this is a little further along. Because I felt so alone in my pain, I was determined to construct a world in which there were not only lots of other people like me, but vastly more people than is commonly recognized. That's really, it's really a fantastic
thank
essay.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope more people read it. Very few people read it. Yeah, it's funny. I just there's this need to be part of a group. I mean, I just think it's a very basic human instinct. We're tribal as a species, um, but it's, when you're constructing a false tribe out of some kind of need to feel like you belong, I think that's worth examining.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think that a lot of a lot of people's unnecessary anger and unnecessary cancellations of people and political bickering, not all of it, but there's a large chunk which is based on a kind of desperate attempt to maintain cognitive dissonance and not wanting to see the reality of the world as it is or of your situation as it is, and therefore just fighting this rearguard battle. I think that a lot of the kind of obsession with social constructivism on the left, the perfectibility of the human being,
Mm-hmm.
the malleability of people, that is part of that fear of confronting something that might be very uncomfortable and
Yeah.
can't be easily and not easily changeable also.
Right. I mean, and that's what the broken in world is, right? Like just,
Mm.
finding the peace in the messiness and uncertainty. Like, and that's actually something again that this is going back to the aging thing. As you get older, you realize that you're never going to get it right and you're just less naive about human nature and I think more accepting about other people uh and so I that's why I think so much of this sort of this like kind of whatever you want to call it, postmodern, the sort of deconstructivist instinct is very popular among young people because it assumes some kind of utopian possibility globally and within oneself. And once you get older, it's harder to buy that narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also a weird response to language and words because it implies that a language has some weird power over you. So if you use certain words, you will start to think in certain ways. And therefore, concomitantly, that you can use language to mold reality rather than just describing.
Yeah, and I guess you can. I mean, we do see that
Mm,
happening.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but
To
it
some extent,
shouldn't.
you can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the other two pieces that I really liked, the first one, my other two favorite pieces, the first one was Playlist of Tears, which
Oh,
is an absolutely incredible piece. And
oh, I almost did not include that piece.
oh, well, I'm so glad you included it rather than me describing it because I'm tending to talk too much in this interview, I notice. Why don't you describe it?
Oh, well,
And why did you not want to include it?
I
That's
think that
fascinating.
I remember getting some blowback when I published it. I published it. I was writing for Medium's Gen magazine, or I say magazine as if such a thing exists anymore. You know what I mean? Site,
Yeah.
platform.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't as in my starting in my mid 40s, I guess, sort of around the time of my divorce, I just found that listening to music was so emotionally intense that I couldn't tolerate it. Everything made me sad. Everything, just kind of reminded me of something, took me to a place that I couldn't stand it. So I was just started listening to a lot of podcasts, and I needed voices, people talking in my ears. And I I'm not really sure why this was. Like, it was there was something about it that was too upsetting. And it was just kind of an examination of that. And also just the fact that, there are there's so many things to listen to. There's so much music out there that it's overwhelming. I don't know. It's funny, and I actually remember I published the piece, and a couple of friends of mine who are musicians were sort of like offended by it. Like, oh, how can you? What do you don't care about music anymore, kind of thing. It's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Like, I care about it too much. Um,
Mm.
and even now, I just sometimes it forces you. I guess listening to music, it it takes me back to a place when I was much younger and would be listening to music and imagining my life in the future. Like I would be sitting there and listening to something and it would be really meaningful. And I would think, okay, well, this is how my life is going to be. Like I would look at my life ahead of me as if it's a road ahead of me. And so now if I'm listening to music, it's like, wow, the road narrows, right? Like the horizon line is not what it was before. And so I think that there's just something for me anyway about it that it sort of really reminds you of your mortality, and that's pretty hard to take sometimes.
You say, as I've grown older, there's scarcely a song in my iTunes library that doesn't make me so sad as to render it almost unlistenable. That statement is so dark I almost didn't write it, but there it is. And when I try to figure out how I got to this place, all I can think is that it's not just music we're talking about here, but the soundtrack to a life, and that is a very different thing than just a bunch of songs. And then you say, slightly further on, whereas I once organized my life around music, I now organize it around podcasts. In a way, I've come to avoid my own music as if avoiding pain. That's another statement so dark I almost hesitated to write it, but something tells me I'm not the only one in this predicament. As someone noted to me recently, music is alive with associations. I can't listen to some of it if it's too connected to a painful situation. Podcasts don't seem to hold those same associations for me. I think it's, I don't have this feeling about music at all. I tend to listen to audiobooks, even though I don't get as much out of them as I do out of reading because my attention wanders a lot when I'm listening.
Yeah.
And I learned the hard way that I can't listen to novels on audiobook because I just lose track. Whereas if I'm listening to something nonfiction, I feel like at least I got some bits of it
Oh
lodged
gosh,
into my
okay.
brain.
The bar is low. Yeah.
Yeah, because I tend to daydream and get
Yeah,
distracted
me
and
too.
things. And then when I'm daydreaming too much, I put on music as a soundtrack to that. And so music doesn't affect me in any negative way, but I really recognize this feeling, and I think it's a mourning for what is lost. And that soundtrack to a life, it's reminding you of fragments of your life that are gone.
Yeah.
Whether they were happy or sad, they are now gone. And I had that feeling extremely intensely when I visit Cambridge. So I was at university in Cambridge and I did my PhD there too. So I was there for quite a long time. And when I finished my PhD and I didn't manage to get a position at Cambridge and I knew that I was leaving, I was in so much distress at leaving. I just felt I will never again live in a place this beautiful. I cannot bear being away from surroundings of so much beauty. It's necessary to my emotional well-being. And it's funny, and my time at Cambridge was absolutely idyllic. And I feel as though I no longer have that feeling that I wish I lived in Cambridge. I love living in Sydney. This is perfect. I live in the best possible place in the world as far as I'm concerned. But when I go back to visit Cambridge, I am really overwhelmed emotionally and I almost can't bear it.
Yeah. Yes, I relate to that. I mean, that's sort of how I feel. That's how I feel about Los Angeles. Like I know I would if it's very difficult to live here, but it would be intolerable to think that I couldn't live here. Which is not the same as Sydney. I mean, Australia's amazing. Yeah, but it's interesting that you don't have that about music. I mean, I think that
No.
I always, I mean, I'm from a musical family, and I always I played the oboe quite seriously. Which is not the kind. I don't listen to a lot of oboe music necessarily, but I guess I always, on some level, when I was younger, thought, oh well, someday I'll take up the piano or I'll take up the guitar and actually play music that is satisfying to me. and it just never happened. And so now it's like, oh, that's never going to happen. And it's a loss, so.
Mm.
And I'm
Mm.
such a perfectionist. I mean, I can't just pick up. There's like, oh, just pick up the guitar. No, I can't. It's got to be. I gotta. It's gotta start with the alternate tunings and go on from there. So I will not start from the beginning. Anyway,
Saying that you're a perfectionist makes me wonder what your writing process is, whether you edit a lot or whether you just vomit
yeah.
things, as they
No, I
say
don't vomit.
in
I don't.
Spanish, do you vomit things out? Yeah.
No. No, and I think that's what makes it hard for me in this sort of creative economy. I'm not a good blogger. I have tried so many times to just put something out there, give them something every day, and I cannot do it. A lot of it is I just don't want to say something unless it's original. I mean, forget
Mm,
like on a
mm,
sentence by sentence level. It's like I don't even want to start if I'm not going to say something that hasn't been said already. And everything has been said. Everything is being said all the time by everybody. So yeah, I have a very high standard. Um, but then when you're cooking, you're cooking. That's great. There's no better feeling. And I think that my musical background, my father was a arranger, orchestrator. Um, and I just the way that I approach sentences and paragraphs and pieces is with a very much a musical sensibility. Like there's a rhythm to the piece, there's time signature, even like I really see it as a matter of like having, themes. And it's very much running on there's a parallel track going on with my writing that is musical, I would say.
mm, mm. Yeah, I try to aspire to that as well, like having specific themes like water and swimming as a recurring theme, even if it's not
Oh.
particularly relevant. Um, I'm using that as just a theme that I keep returning to. Do you have themes in that sense, like motifs that you try to incorporate or
I
that
mean,
you
you wanna
just
have
keep
a kind of
incorporating?
you wanna kind of have a callback. I mean, I think that there's I mean, for me, it's like it's really a rhythm thing. Like you have a really long sentence, and then you're gonna put a period on it, and then you're gonna have a short sentence. And there is you want the reader to have a sense that you know what you're doing. You're not just leading them down on some run-on sentence path without having a sense of direction. It's like there's a reason for doing it. There's a reason for having these words in the places that they are. There's a reason for repeating certain descriptions, or but yeah, it's pretty intuitive. But no, I edit. I mean, I quite heavily, and it's can be quite miserable. And you got to the worst is you got to, of course, take stuff out that doesn't belong there.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can have like incredible verbiage that you love, but it just doesn't make any sense on a logical level, and it doesn't work in the piece. And you know, that's the kill your darlings thing, of course.
Yeah, I find your writing, so you have a quite kind of calm, plain, unadorned style, and then you suddenly hit people with a metaphor. And I've always aspired to that kind of artistic restraint.
Hmm.
Sorry, it's making me sound like I'm as much of a writer as you are, which I'm not. But when I used to be a dancer, for example, I aspired to be kind of mostly making very clean, uncluttered, unadorned movements, and then occasionally doing a decorative flourish to express something in the music. But I never danced like that. I just put decorations absolutely everywhere. I just an addiction to the ornate,
Uh-huh.
which is not necessarily very effective, but I'm going to give a little example of what I mean here. So this is from the essay, The Unbearable Halfness of Being. And this is when you were talking about, I think this is the one where you were talking about having one foot in and one foot out of the
Right.
door,
Yeah.
which is a kind of theme that you keep coming up with or keep returning to. And you say, in July, I went back to New York for a visit. My subtenants were in Europe and were happy to let me stay in the apartment if I deducted the days from their rent. For 3 days, I sat on my deck and looked at the view. On the weekend, I drove upstate with a friend and looked around the countryside to see if perhaps that was a place I might want to live. For all my indecisiveness, I knew 2 things for certain. First, housing costs in Los Angeles were prohibitively expensive. Second, I could never again live in a New York City apartment with a dog, at least not with my particular dog, or at least not until he was geriatric and no longer interested in walking more than 10 feet at a time. But there was a potential third option. Perhaps I could buy a place in upstate New York. I'm going to just skip a little bit. So here you're talking in this very colloquial, plain, straightforward, factual way. And then you suddenly hit us with, what can I say? You're talking about Los Angeles. I love how the hulking topography of the West enlarges the world's font size. So you're reading, and then suddenly you grab your pencil, like, underlining that bit. That's a sort of rhythmic structure that you have in a lot of your writing. This conversational mode, which then is interspersed with these bursts of very arresting metaphor.
Oh, thank you for observing that. Yeah, I mean, I like writing about topography and light, and I like writing about place, especially in the West. For some reason, there's just something about it. There's something about the air. I mean, especially right now, it's getting to be magic hour time. It's about 6 p.m. my time, and it's like
Catastrophe Hour.
It's the catastrophe. Yes, you're talking. You schedule. It's so funny because I was getting ready for this, and I have to go out after this, and I was like, and I'm like, I started to have that feeling of dread, not having anything to do with our conversation, but just kind of like overall. And I thought, what is going on? I said, oh, of course, it's the catastrophe hour. Like, it's just something terrible. Like something terrible is going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking out, and it's just that kind of starting to be that golden kind of blue tinted kind of hue, and the air is just, there's something about it. There's just a lightness to the air because it's dry, and probably quite a bit like Sydney, actually.
Sydney's quite wet. Sydney's pretty
Oh, it
wet,
is?
actually.
Okay. What do I know? Yeah.
I actually love Los Angeles. I deeply adore Los Angeles, which people are always surprised by, but I do. And I think actually many people have a catastrophe hour. This is what I've discovered talking to friends. Like one of my best friends who says that he wakes up every morning and for the first hour he hates himself. And when I was telling this story to someone else recently, he also said that he's the same. He also hates himself for the first hour of the day. So the first hour is for regrets and anxieties and concerns. And then it kind of calms down and you settle into the pace of the day, which, my catastrophe hour is late at night, which is probably more common, but it's like there's a moment in the day which is where the kind of structures that were sustaining you are somehow weaker, and you can fall into that. You can get sucked down that funnel into that into that feeling.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The first thing in the morning is usually my best. It's like I haven't screwed up the day yet. There's so much potential, like, I can have my coffee and enjoy that. That's interesting that it would be early in the morning.
So the other piece that I especially loved is the last piece, The End of the Personal. And you talk about entering the age of no reply. Before I read a little bit from it, I'd like you to talk about what you mean by the age of no reply.
Oh gosh, I know that that's the first line of the piece. I'm trying to
Sorry.
No, I
try.
what's funny is that I collected the pieces, and 3 of them are brand new. So the last 3 pieces have never been published anywhere. So they're only in this book, and they're pretty recently written. But the publisher said, "Can you write one more piece? Because the book's not quite long enough." And this was last summer, I guess. And I was like, oh God, I don't know what to write about. I don't know. And somehow I had just the degree. I had some personal things that I was like, well, do I want to write about that? There were several things I could have written about, but they honestly felt too personal for this collection of personal essays. Like I didn't want to get
Mm,
into it.
mm,
And so
mm,
I was trying to figure out why that was. And so I ended up writing a piece exploring that. And so I guess, yeah, and we entered the age of no reply. I mean, it starts with this scenario of like people sort of being ghosted in different ways, like somebody applies for a job, and there's this thing that happens now. That people get the hiring process is just excruciating. Like it goes on for months, and you have to meet with everybody at the company and interview, and then when they decide not to hire you, they don't even tell you. like, like this is a thing, and then of course
mm,
people experience this in the dating world, and then I also talk about how kids, I give an example of like a child growing up who's afraid to leave his room, and he's just, really totally on the screens, and the parents sort of pretend that they're concerned about it, but on some level they're relieved because their own anxiety. If he were out climbing trees, then they would have to sort of, worry about that. So anyway, I guess it was the age of no reply just sort of has to do with the way experience just kind of plops itself down in front of us, and we don't necessarily even react to it anymore.
mm. Yeah, now of course I want to know about the pieces that you didn't write.
Oh, I don't even remember. Like
Yeah,
it was
but
yeah.
what makes you reject a piece as too personal? What is too personal?
Honestly, this is the thing. I mean, the piece is about like, I do this conceit. I don't do it in any of the other pieces. I said, it's the writer, the speaker is the writer, and it's really about, like I used to say, like you have to bleed onto the page, and then
Mm,
it's sort of over the last, probably several years, I feel like the vein is dry. Like I'm tapping on the vein. Like where's the blood? What do I have to say? Like where is it? Um, I just increasingly feel like it's nobody's business. There are personal things that I just don't need to share. And I don't know if that's because I'm older and not as desperate to get published anymore. I mean, honestly, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I needed money. I mean, this sounds so crazy because I made a living as a freelance writer. So
mm,
anything I thought
mm.
of,
Yeah,
anything, I would just
golden age.
pitch.
Yeah.
I would pitch it. I would try to get it. I needed the money, and there's a lot of stuff that I wrote that I wish I had. Published that I wish I hadn't. It's kind of embarrassing, or it was like kind of mean about somebody or something. But I did it because I needed the money, and there's no money anymore. So there's kind of diminishing returns. I guess I just feel like, well, I'm not going to die on that hill. This is not worth saying. The rewards for writing something are so much less than they used to be that you have to really want to say it. I guess
Mm,
I guess that's my
mm.
feeling.
Yeah, that makes sense. I certainly also I try to be kind of as honest as possible in what I'm going to say, but there are some things that I also don't want to say, mostly involving other people. Like
Yeah.
there are some things that I can't say until my sister has died. Sorry, if you're listening. I hope that's not anytime soon, but I think, I would involve her, and I'm not going to put her into the public sphere.
Yeah.
Um, but also there are some things where I just behaved really badly and I feel embarrassed about it, frankly. And I actually just don't want to reveal it.
Right. Or I mean, or the thing, or you can do the thing where like you feel guilty or you behave badly, so you can like write about it and sort of try to reclaim it. I mean, that was the thing I
Yeah,
did a lot, like because
yeah,
that was always the famous like the Nora Ephron scenario, which is, I mean, this is not about behaving badly. This is more about having an embarrassing moment. Like if you slip on a banana peel, you're a fool. If you tell the story of how you slipped on a banana peel, you're the hero. So you want
yeah,
to
yeah.
take these experiences and reshape them into a funny story. And so I've done that forever. That's how I
Mm,
live
mm,
my life.
mm,
But I guess now I feel like it wouldn't be received well. It's funny. Somebody,
mm,
I mean, again, like I think that the reaction to this book has been surprisingly positive. But I can see like there's probably some people who are interacting with the book who haven't read my other work, or they don't read this kind of thing really. And, they just see it as like, oh, you're just embarrassing yourself again. Like this is self-indulgent, this is solipsistic, whatever. And, that's, you're always going to get that kind of response. But I feel that I don't know. I don't have as much patience for, well, actually, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm more private. I mean, honestly, the older I've gotten, it's not so cute. Like, I guess it's like if you have your sort of foibles and silly mistakes and zany moments, and it's one thing when you're 25, but when you're 55, it's just no. Like, I'd rather just present myself in a more serious way, I guess. Not that I'm being inauthentic. It's just not. It doesn't charm me. Like those kind of youthful kind of foibles. They're youthful. That's a young person's
I feel
game.
there is a lot of strength to being unblackmailable, though. So I posted nude photos of myself on social media, notoriously, even though not like raunchy, just in hiking and things like that. Even though my boss
nude hiking, as one does.
No, well, swimming, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Hiking to a waterhole and then swimming and things. So there's one where I'm standing on the balcony at home. And it's, even though my boss follows me on social media, and also, I'm 56, and thanks to Ozempic, which I am no longer overweight, but used to be fairly overweight as well. But I kind of felt like nobody else can embarrass me. Here it is, deal with it. That there's a kind of felt like a very strong gesture to me. And I was really surprised by the fact that even though I have a fair number of social media followers and many people who dislike detractors, I guess, or for me, it's a lot. In objective terms, it's very few, but for me personally, it feels subjectively like a lot. I was surprised by how few people made nasty comments, almost none. Like there were 500 comments and one person was like, this is disgusting or something. And I felt as though it's kind of a bit like the subspace communication that I was talking about earlier. Everybody is naked underneath there. So everyone kind of realizes that you become a sort of voice for people. You become a way of, if you're a good writer, you become a way of admitting the things that people don't want to admit. And they see themselves in that.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm actually a very private person, and, people might find that curious because I have written very revealing essays over the years. But the thing is, it's all about control. Like, I'm controlling what I'm putting out there. And, I think I said this in my book, The Unspeakable. That is a collection of essays, and those essays were written for the book. They did not appear other places, and I said, for every sentence you read that seems, vulnerable or intimate or revealing somehow, there's 500 sentences I didn't include. For every detail I've included, there's 500 details I didn't include. And yeah, I just think I think almost my willingness to write about myself in the way I do is actually very much goes hand in hand with how private I am, because I'm controlling the narrative, and I'm kind of taking my experience and turning into something else. And I always, I think with this kind of medium, with this genre, you want the reader to feel like they know everything about the narrator, but not necessarily anything about the author. It's that sort of intimacy with the reader. It's a literary experience. They don't know me. And it's just honestly like not anybody's business. I mean, I am pretty private. But it's a kind of a trick,
Yeah, that's a very good distinction. And I think, I mean, I don't feel like I know you from reading the essays. it's more like you are you're taking a personal slant on, personal route into, tapping into some very deep and universal preoccupations
I'm
and
trying to
themes.
make a connection. I mean, and again, I've talked about this a lot, like the difference between confessing and confiding. So, to me, if first person writing should be, you're confiding in your reader. You're saying, come along with me as I tell you a story about something that happened to me. Let me tell you my thoughts. It's an offering. And
Mm,
you want to be generous. So if you're
mm,
just vomiting, as you said earlier, like that, the confession is actually an imposition. I mean, I feel
mm,
like you're actually asking the reader to forgive you, or
mm.
to, tell you you're not so bad, or say, oh, I'm that way too. And that to me is not interesting at all. Like,
Well, that's victimhood writing as well. That's this kind of preoccupation with
yeah. And it's
what other people
manipulative.
think.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and
It's,
wanting other
yeah.
people to validate you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, like if people, you're asking a lot for somebody to pick up something that you wrote and read it. And so you need to, I think, be aware of you're giving them something that's fully cooked and been thought through, and um, is, hopefully giving them something in there. It's a gift that you're giving, not you're not asking them to give you back something.
So there's this piece in the passage in the last essay where you talk about a disagreement you have with Sarah Hayder about personal essays. I'm going
Mhm.
to just read this. So you talk about having pivoted over to content creation, and that one of the things you do, one of the hustles, is a podcast on which so you write about yourself in the third person in
Yes,
this
yes.
in this essay
In this one,
only.
don't get the wrong idea, people. It only happens in this one piece.
um, on which she analyzes and dissects the culture with a woman more than 20 years her junior. They're always on the lookout for material, and when the writer spots a provocative, newly published personal essay, she brings it up for discussion. Such essays tell of messy, complicated emotions around supposedly sacred subjects. They take a torch to sentimentality, asking if marriage and family is worth the trouble, if divorce is a privilege, if death can be a gift. They draw the map of the broken-in world, so there's a really nice callback. The writer's podcast partner abhors these essays. She sees them as soiled laundry that happens to be made of words. She sees no difference between a memoirist who makes an honest and eloquent appraisal of her quirks and shortcomings, and a reality television star or internet influencer who behaves grotesquely on camera. The writer finds this upsetting in a way she cannot articulate. Her partner has an uncommonly fierce intellect and is uniquely honest about the uncomfortable truths of the human condition. Yet she sees little value in giving personal voices to those truths, especially with a name attached. She thinks that if you must talk about resenting your children or hating your spouse, you should confine it to Reddit forums or anonymous blog posts. The writer tries to explain that wrestling with the complexities of your conscience and shaping them into an artful essay is worlds away from posting on anonymous forums or being an exhibitionist on camera. She tries to explain that art is the antidote to exhibitionism. So I'm really intrigued by that idea that art is the antidote to exhibitionism. What do you mean
I
by
think it
that?
is because it's cooked. I mean, art,
As
it
opposed to
has
raw.
artistry to it. I mean,
Mm,
it's not content. Well, content can be anything, but I guess I feel like, with art, when you create art, you have made choices. You have
mm,
decided what to include. I mean, it's funny how actors talk about, making choices. Like when they're up, you're giving a performance, the director will say like, "Oh, you've made good choices here." Like, and that's, you're not just standing there doing improv, whatever comes to your mind. I mean, and you're making a deliberate choice to like play something one way or the other. And I mean, that to me is what I think what we're losing now across all genres is just a sense that like this is a piece of art that somebody has thought really hard about how to present. This person has some craft. They have an aesthetic. They have a story to tell, maybe some kind of message. I mean, so I think this is just partly the way everything's presented. I mean, you could have like this incredibly complicated, aesthetically rich art film up on a streaming network right next to, Jackass Part 500 or something. I know that's an old reference, but like there's no distinction. Like we just don't know where to go. And I'm not sure that I don't know. I don't know that people young people coming up now are even really interested in making those distinctions. Maybe I'm selling them short, but it's something I've observed.
I want to say I apologize for talking so much about myself.
Not at
And
all.
it's interesting
I
that
like to ask you things because I'm an interviewer, so I always like to.
it's interesting that as I was making notes, so many of the notes were about me. I obviously didn't read those ones, but and I think this is one of the things that makes it less a kind of, it's not a confession, it's not gossip about you personally. It's more like all of these things are jumping off points, and
Right.
you are modeling a way of diving from those diving boards. And so in general, each essay made me ruminate on some parallel thing in my own life or that I've thought about, like the music one making me think about my feelings about Cambridge, for example. And I think that's one I think that's one way in which it's one of the things that makes this kind of writing valuable, is that it's easily integratable into your own personal narrative, you as the reader. So you're creating your own like thought palace in your head, and you're kind of popping some little bits from the Meghan Daum writing into there.
Thanks for putting it that way. Yeah, somebody said to me, the thing about this book is that like we could not be more. This is a woman around my age who said we could not be more different, but I also think we might be the same person. And like our lives could not be more different. But reading this makes me think we might be the same person. So I thought that was a great compliment.
Yeah, I didn't feel that way. I mean, there are some things I couldn't relate to at all in a sense, like the femcell cope essay in particular. But but nevertheless, I enjoyed them. Those are more like seeing the stranger in a train and looking. You talk about looking across at a stranger with a different life and thinking, is she looking back at me and wondering what it's like to be living my life?
Right.
And you said it would be more, you're looking at a woman who is, this is at the end of the femcell cope essay, a really wonderful essay ending. You say that, wonderful essay, really wonderful ending. And you say that you look over at her, she's looking at you, and she's a woman, a wife and mother, and she sees you, say, sitting alone at a restaurant, happily reading a book as you're eating, rather than having to make conversation with your husband, or she sees you in a park reading with your dog while she's got her young kids and her baby in a pram. And you can see the woman looking over wistfully at you, and perhaps she is thinking, I wonder what my life would be like if I had that life. And perhaps in some ways it would be better. There's a kind of certain wistful longing to change places. And you say, it would be neater, a cleaner kind of parallel. It would be more writerly if I could end by saying, sometimes I look and feel the same way about her. And you say, but I don't. I am leading the life. I'm in the life I was meant to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a theme too. I mean, that gets back to the situational set point thing. It's like, it's this kind of, I'm a pretty solitary person. I mean, not that I don't have friends and relationships, but like this, living alone and kind of working alone. And I don't think it's not really the best. It's not even necessarily the happiest. It's not the best. It might not even be on some level what I want, but it's what's right for me. Like that is the situational set point. Like it might not be the happiest life, but it is the right life. And I think that's a distinction that is important to kind of train ourselves to be able to make.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it returns this thing of being unvarnished and also maybe sad, there's a kind of air of melancholy to this book, but it's not self-indulgent. So it's not, you can't be making a bid for the reader to feel sorry for you. Actually, generally in life, it's not a good idea to focus on trying to make people feel sorry for you. That's a really bad strategy.
No, that freaks me out. That makes me shudder just to think of it. Yeah,
it's horrible. And it's kind of, it's maybe not the best, but it's right, and there's a meaningfulness to it.
Yeah, I'm in the right life, that doesn't mean it's a perfect life by any means, but it's the right one.
Is there anything I haven't asked you that you wish I'd asked you, or that you would like to have talked about?
No, this has been such a great conversation. I can't thank you enough for reading so closely and having such thoughtful questions, Iona. It's really a privilege.
Well, as always, I love your books. I've read the others as well. This is the latest one. Everyone go read it.
Yeah. Oh, and I will say that I'm doing a book club on my Substack. So we're going to read, there's 14 essays in the book. And so we're reading one essay per week, and we're going to discuss it on Zoom. It's every Wednesday, going to run through the summer. And so if you are a paying Substack subscriber, at the annual level, you can be in the book club. So you can go to my Substack and find out how to join us.
What time is it?
It's at I know you can't please the world when it comes to these I know. It's at let's see, it's every Wednesday starting June 11th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. So I don't know if you
that's
up in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Oh, it's possible for you? Okay.
I think that's 7 to 8 or a.m. or something.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah. And
no, Eastern time. No,
Eastern time, right.
No.
Well, we will, and actually if you are a member, we will send you a link to the recording if you can't actually come to the meeting. If you are a member of the club, we'll find out a way to do that. A secure link. But like everything, it's off, like all unspeakable, unspeakeasy endeavors, it's off the record. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll put the details of your Substack and everything else in the show notes. And as usual, if you are listening to this on YouTube or on Megaphone and you are a Quillette subscriber, you can go to quillette.com and read the transcript and see show notes there as well. Okay. Thank you, Meghan.
Thank you, Iona. Thank you so much.